And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 88. Tonight, the Seasonal Celebration Photography Challenge. Last week I set a challenge for creating some photos. I gave a whole bunch of ideas on how you could create photos for this festive season. And that doesn't have to necessarily be Christmas, because it's also Hanukkah and midwinter, and in southern hemisphere, midsummer. We've got the whole solstice, I was about to say equinox there, but the whole solstice thing going on. So I thought, I gave a bunch of ideas of how you could think about photographing these celebrations. We've had only about half a dozen submissions this week, so quieter than usual, so it might just be a slightly shorter podcast than usual. However, if you have any questions as we go, put them into the comments. Say hi as well. Say hello. Let me know you're here. Now, just going to try a little intro thing I created during the week. There. Hoping that worked. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm always seeing podcasts always seem to have this sort of fancy intro. They come on and say, hey, we're here, and then they do one of these fancy little intros. So I thought I'd have a go myself. Hope you like it. I don't know. I'll have to sort of have a think about whether I keep doing it. We'll just have to see. So, yeah, here we are, live on YouTube on this, Sunday afternoon here in the UK, Sunday morning in the United States and other Americas, and Sunday evening over in Asia. Excuse me. I've got a little bit of a cold at the moment. I'm a bit dosed up with ibuprofen and paracetamol, so I might end up doing a few coughs and might sound a bit rough before it's all over. Okay, so I can see there's a few comments in already. If you've not been here before, leave a hi in the comments. Let me know where you're from as well, whereabouts in the world. That's always interesting. So, comments that we already have. Oh, Pat's here, says this must be the right page. Hi, everybody from Somerset. Roy is saying, greetings all from Yorkshire. Meg, that's my daughter, says, good afternoon, everyone. And Maggie, my wife, says, good afternoon to everyone from Castle Douglas. Stacey says, good morning, everyone. Sunny and chilly morning. That's in Philadelphia. No, not Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Sorry. That's Garry says hello from the Peak District in Derbyshire. Rosemarie says good morning from wet and chilly Washington State. Brian Gillespie says hi all, hope you're well. Managed to make it this week. Glad you could, Brian. That's Murphy says hi. Is Robert from saying howdy from Texas. Pat says like your baubles. And thank you, Pat. Always nice to be complimented on your baubles. And Jackie says hello, Jackie from South Africa. And, Stacey's finally feeling a bit better after a few weeks of a head cold. That's good to know. Yes, sort of sitting behind my head here, we now have a few little Christmas baubles, a little bit of extra Christmas lighting, which you can't quite see. I do, in fact, have a little tree. In fact, I wonder if I can just kind of... Yep, down there. There we go. So, yes, bits and pieces of the season, the Christmas season here, finally making it into our house. Oh, and Viji's here as well. Says good evening, everyone. Lots of love from India. So, yeah, we've got people from the Pacific West of America through to India. So we've got quite a spread this afternoon. All right, okay, so what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about the notion of the Seasonal Photo Challenge. And like I say, we sort of put out lots of ideas last week. This week, unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be that big a response to it. Possibly the smallest response we've ever actually had to a challenge. Now, I'm not sure quite why that is. I can make guesses on the fact that maybe because we're close to the season, into the festive season, people have been just a bit too busy. I'm also wondering whether doing this on a Sunday, because we've been doing this on Tuesday for the last year and a half, but the recent shift to shoot Sunday, I don't know whether that's interfering with people getting stuff done at the weekend. Anyway, something to maybe keep an eye on. If everybody's feeling that actually it's really difficult to respond to the challenges now that we've shifted the time slot, do let me know. And I don't know, maybe I would just have to let people know 2 weeks in advance rather than one. We'll just have to see. Okay. Um, oh, we've got a comment from Mariana Lyons, vasf.tech, which makes no sense whatsoever. So I don't know whether that's a spam, Mariana, or whether you've just accidentally pasted something by mistake. If you're genuine, do say hi. Stick around. Right. Okay. So what are we going to do? Right. So let's make a start then on the images sent in. So what I think we're going to do is we're going to start with Rosemary, and Rosemary sent in this photo. Very seasonal, very Christmas decorations, and I thought it was probably a very good place to start. And what Rosemary says is, whilst she says it's not a very creative shot, but it has a great story. And I thought this was a good place to start with the idea of seasonal celebration and photos, because Rosemary goes on to say, one of my childhood friends had a family tradition at Christmas that I love so much. Her mother had created an ornament to commemorate each major event during that year. The birth of a child, new job, move. To hear that family history was a special thing, even as a young child. I knew this was a tradition I wanted to start with my own family. Fast forward quite a few years, and this is the first ornament that commemorates the beginning of our family. My husband proposed to me at Cape Perpetua on the Oregon coast, so we purchased a seashell ornament in honour of the occasion. He gave me an engagement ring that he'd gotten from a vending machine, so he would have one for the proposal. Later he let me pick out a real engagement ring for my choosing. This original ring is still very special, and I glued it to our shell ornament where it hangs with honour near the top of our tree each year. So if we zoom in here, we can see the ring is glued to the seashell ornament. Says, and our children have heard the story each year as we trim our tree, and hopefully their children will want to hear it in years to come. Our tree is covered in baby shoes, little figures representing our many pets, toy houses and barns to signify moves to new homes, funny little ornaments the children choose to represent what was significant to them during the year. But this, our first ornament commemorating our engagement, is the most special since it launched it all. So I thought it's a lovely start and a lovely idea there, and a great tale to go with it there, Rosemary. So thanks very much for sending that one in. Now, Rosemary also says on a technical comment on this photo, is it definitely called for a tripod. In addition to a slow shutter speed, 1/60th of a second, the focal plane of this macro lens is so tiny that I tossed out quite a few images where it missed the focus. Once I bought the tripod, it was much easier to get the ring into better focus. I forgot to lower the ISO after my attempts to handhold, so it's a 1000 ISO. And what we notice is if we zoom in, you can see here that it is actually really quite noisy. And certainly this is true. Oh, where's that gone? Hey, off all over the place now. Let's try and... There we go, back here. Quick glance of everything else that's turning up tonight. So, yes, if you were putting this on a tripod, because you could have then had a much longer shutter speed, maybe 1/10 of a second or 1/6 of a second or half a second or something like that, you could have then gone for a much lower ISO, gone for a 100 ISO, and that would have allowed it to be a much cleaner image, which would allow you to then kind of zoom in or crop or whatever and still have more detail that would come out of it rather than getting lost in the noise. So yeah, remember, if you're using a tripod, it's always worth just double checking your ISO. You've got many more possibilities with that. So thanks very much for sending that one in, Rosemary. I thought it was a great start, and lovely to hear the kind of family traditions of how people are approaching the season. Right, a couple of comments in here. Where are we? Oh yeah. Robert says, love the framing. Viji says, looks very festive. Lovely ring and great memories. And Maggie says, love the idea of your special ornaments, Rosemary. Cecilia Johns has come in and put vask.tech. Now, I can only assume, given that Marion Lyons put something very similar, that this is some kind of spam thing going on. No idea why or what. All I would suggest is don't click on it. I suppose I can click on that and then remove. And try and remove that, but who knows, kind of a bit of a strange thing. I don't really know why anybody's clicking that. Rosemary says, thanks, it's a fun tradition. Pat says, I have my granddaughter's baby sock on my notice board, and she's nearly 301. I doubt your granddaughter is really 301, Pat, because that would make you even older. You're definitely not in your 300s. I guess that's probably 31 or 30. April's here. April says, hello everyone, just got up. I've been ill with COVID this week. Oh dear, you have our sympathy, you really do. Can't wait to see some happy festive photos. Well, you've managed to just miss Rosemary's, so you can catch up with that one. Right, okay, let's take a little look at... Okay, Pat said 30, yes. I would have thought your granddaughter was more likely to be 30 than 301. Right, okay, let's move on then. So, Robert. Now, yes, Robert's photo. So, Robert went for quite a difference. There's no Christmas trees in this one. So, this is Robert's photo. Robert says this was taken on my Canon RP with an EF 85mm 1.2 lens. I saw many men perform this and photographed a lot. This was not the most interesting photo, but I submitted this one because no one's face is revealed. That's fair enough. That's... I think yes, that shows a certain level of respect there, Robert. I think that's given the setting of your photo. So no privacy concerns. Now, okay. So this is a Jewish ritual that men perform during the Hanukkah celebrations. There was a rabbi helping people perform this ritual. They recite a prayer while wearing the tefillin. Now, tefillin. You can correct me on the pronunciation. The purpose of the tefillin is to serve as a reminder of God's intervention at the time of the exodus from Egypt. While wrapping the strap around the hand and fingers, many have the custom of reciting verses that declare the loving union between God and his people Israel. Hosea 2:21-22. I will betroth you to me forever, and I will betroth you to me with righteousness, justice, kindness, and mercy. I will betroth you to me with fidelity, and you shall know God. Okay. There are some minor edits to bring out the details and crop the composition. I'm very pleased with it. I hope you are too. Okay, so I think Robert, that's a really interesting. So you managed with the traditions that you're following, you've managed to capture something which is and really sort of bring out that explanation, which is interesting. Now you also sent me the original, which is here. We can see that you kind of cropped in, brought out, darkened some areas, and intensified others. A couple of things I would say about this photo in terms of editing it, Robert. First of all, the darkening down. I can see why you darkened down the forehead because it was catching a lot of light, but it kind of feels just a bit too dark. It doesn't quite feel natural there. And also, because it sort of rubs up against the hat and we've still got a slightly pale patch, it looks slightly odd. So I think you need to be slightly more careful about how you're darkening. The other thing that kind of I can't help but feel with this is the back of this guy here actually ends up taking up half the photo nearly. Although really the photo is about this guy here, that's what our attention is being drawn to, so much of the image is actually taken up by this guy on the right. And in a way, I think if you sort of managed to move yourself around slightly to the left, you could have sort of focused in a bit more on the guy, had this guy and had the one with his back to us slightly less in frame. Now, I also understand you probably at this point possibly bringing the face into view of the guy standing behind him. So another option to this is the idea of basically recropping it. Does this picture necessarily have to be a kind of a landscape crop when actually it's kind of really more about this person? And so I would say you've got two options here. You can either kind of come in and go, you can do something, a much more of a kind of portrait crop and not worry too much about the other people that are in it if it's about him. Or, and I think this is an important bit, that you talked about the fact that he's not just reciting this on his own, he's reciting it with the rabbi who's kind of helping him, and that it's actually much more of a communal thing happening amongst other men. So if the idea then is that you want to have the other men included, maybe an option here is to go for a square crop. In which case, if we would be looking roughly at, let's say, you take something like that, and then move this around, move him to the edge of the square, and something like that, maybe even
bring it down a little bit, something like that. And now we've got your man here. He is now definitely the center of attention, but we do have and this back and shoulder isn't taking up all the, grabbing all attention, taking up most of the photo, but there's enough of somebody else in here, and you've got the other figures around to know that this man isn't in isolation as he's performing the ritual. So there's a suggestion for you, Robert. Hope that makes sense. But yeah, really interesting. Thank you for sending that one in. Right. Okay, let's flip back. Okay, a couple of people wishing April well and fast recoveries. Stacey says pronounce Tifil-in. Tifil-in. Okay, thank you for that. Rosemary says that's a very interesting picture, Robert. Agree, nice and sharp, well cropped. Stacey says my father wore it to his bar mitzvah many moons ago, as it marked his becoming an adult. Okay. And Rosemary says I wonder if a pool of light wants to hit the rabbi more and less the shoulder of the other fellow. Yeah, I think we're kind of back into that notion of where your attention's getting drawn to. And Robert says, thanks for the edit advice. Much better as usual. Oh, I'm glad that was useful. Excuse me. Right, okay. Next up. Oh, excuse me. Definitely, I've got this really kind of tickly chest and throat at the moment. This is part of the problem. See, oddly enough, when we were all in lockdown, I didn't catch anything because we weren't mixing with anybody. Since this all come out and we've been mixing with people again, yeah. What's this? Garry says, how did you get on in the storm this week, Kim? Oh, well, this week's storm actually didn't hit us anything like as bad. The previous week's storm, we'd had Storm Arwen, that had brought down guttering from the hotel next door. It had thrown a chunk of wood that we had up against the wall across our garden, managed to break a garden bench and blow our wheelie bins over as well. So when we knew that Storm Barra was supposed to be coming in this week, we kind of went round, cleared the garden, made everything sort of storm safe. But actually the winds were coming in from a different direction, and by and large we were kind of protected by the hotel rather than where the wind was coming in the last time from the other direction and kind of creating eddies and swirling the stuff around. So yeah, we were fine, Garry. Hope you were okay in the Peak District. Right, okay, so next picture up then we're going to look at is Meg. So my daughter Meg was chatting. She said she wanted to have a go at putting up some kind of photo, and so she was looking around. We've got some fairy lights now hanging up in the kitchen, running behind some mugs that we just have hanging down from the overhead cupboards. So Meg was rather intrigued by the lighting and decided that she would take a photo and capture this notion of the light that's sort of running down. And what I really like about this is that notion of it's quite diagonal. You get sort of depth going into the picture. It's also the mugs become kind of almost a bit like Christmas ornaments. So that kind of hanging down a bit. My only kind of feeling with this, Meg, is it does feel like a little bit close to the base here, and maybe a little bit more room on the top, and I kind of feel like I'd like a little bit more image underneath. Now I understand what you're probably cropping out is things like the kettle and other things that you didn't feel were necessarily in there, you wanted to have in the picture, but depending on what was there, you kind of might have got away with it. But maybe later on you can show me the original and we can kind of play around with that if you want. But I thought that was a fun wee photo, Meg, and nice to catch on your phone. So thank you for sending that one in. Oh, excuse me. Viji says, nice layering, Meg. Excellent. Right. Oh, excuse me. Oh, that one was sore. Right. Pat says, I like it, Meg. Puts me to shame. Rosemary says, that's a festive idea, Meg. I like it. Garry says, I like the mug shot. My eye flows across the scene and the mugs are revealed in a different way. Excellent. Okay, next up then we have Vandana. So Vandana sent us this photo. and says, trying something different. Soup and sausage as a representative of warmth and comfort. Autumn leaf representing the season. I used 3 pictures I took separately. Critique welcome. Now, Vandana's 3 photos are the ones she used to create this. So she took sausages in a bun, in a roll. She took a photo of some chicken soup, and she took a photo of an autumn leaf, and then has overlaid the 3 of them together and written in soup and sausage seasonal greetings. So, first of all, I want to say, Vandana, I like the fact that you've really had a go at blending images together. As far as I'm aware, this is the first time you've done this. Certainly it's the first time you've done something and submitted it to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres podcast. So this is a sign of you taking your photography and saying, what else can I do with it? Where can I take it? So that's really good and to really be commended. Now, as for this picture itself, I'm less certain about how well it really works, to be honest. There are a few kind of difficulties that we have with it. The first is, I think, overall, well, there's a few different things that are kind of going on. First of all, conceptually, I can understand that for you personally, maybe sausage in a roll is a comfort food, soup, chicken soup, another comfort food. You put in I can kind of see where you're coming from, but I don't know that it necessarily sort of speaks beyond you. And I think when we're creating photos for the idea that the photos are going to be out there and other people are going to look at them, it's about trying to go, well, okay, how well does this translate now, and how much of a story do I need to put across? You know, sometimes we need now. So if we think about Rosemary's shell and ring, even without the backstory, we can still kind of appreciate the notion of the seasonal idea, the fact that it's a Christmas ornament. The backstory then adds to it, certainly, but even without the backstory, the photo kind of stands on its own. It's enhanced by the backstory, but it stands on its own. Similarly with Robert's picture, I think, you know, there's a notion you don't need, the backstory really does enhance the photo, but even without the backstory, if you crop it, it's still an interesting photo of a man intensely focused in his ritual. With this one, I think, without knowing what you're talking about, I think it's much harder to make sense of. And certainly of the 3 aspects of it, I can kind of see the sausage in the roll, I can see the leaf, but the soup, the chicken soup bit, doesn't really come out. Everything's sort of way too soft, way too blurred. And another slight problem with the writing across it, which is the soup and sausage seasonal greetings, is when you're writing text on a photo, one of the biggest problems you have is you either, if you is you need contrast in the text. Really important thing is that if you've got a darkish background, you really need to have light text. If you've got a lightish background, you really need to have dark text. If you've got a mid-range background and you've got a mid-range text in terms of light and dark, the problem is the eyes get really kind of confused. It's not, it's much, much harder to read. So when you're reading text, you really want contrast, but not contrast in colour. What you really need is contrast in tone. So the darker the background, the lighter the text, or the lighter the background, the darker the text. And if you've got a mid-range and you can't really struggling, sometimes that's where you might, or you've got a mixed background, sometimes you put in a kind of semi-layer to make sure that, you know, in between it. Okay, tell you what, let me just sort of briefly show you something. If I open up, let's cancel that. Let's just create a new file, just for the sake of it. Doesn't really matter what it is. And then what I'm going to do is let's shove in, let's just shove in a red background. Okay, so that's a kind of mid-range, middle kind of background. Now, if I'm going to write on this, I need something which contrasts with it. Now, supposing I decide to contrast this with green. Okay, and then I write on here. So where's my write tool? Let's type Happy Christmas. Okay, now that's actually come out black as default. So let's go back to that. make this green. Oops, hold on. Need to select all the text first and then turn it to green. That's what I need to do. And let's just make that a little bit larger so we can all see what we're looking at. And what we find is, if you stare at that for any length of time, your eyes just start to kind of go a bit funny. It's actually much harder to read. Whereas if that text is actually just a plain white, and it's got a little bit more contrast to it, that's easier to read than it was if it was green. Or even if this was black, it might be slightly easier to read as well. But when you've got a mid-range tone, so, you know, even if I put it in a kind of middle grey or something like, you know, so I've got to select all the text first before I do that, a mid-range grey, you'll find, you see this, that it's awfully hard to try and actually make it out. Your brain is struggling an awful lot more to make sense of it. So generally speaking, if you've got a dark background, put a light text, you've got a light background, put a dark text, or if you really had wanted to do something which is a similar colour, what you might need to do is create a layer in between and then actually create, so let's say we actually created a black background, and then maybe we can lighten or darken that a little bit, just to kind of create a little bit more contrast. This isn't perfect, just playing around, but hopefully it gives you some ideas. So really, that's kind of what I wanted to say about that bandana. The pictures that you've got, you will need to be clear about the message, the story you're trying to get across. You've also got to be clear about the blending, and certainly when you're coming to text, that can be a thing as well. However, for all that, like I say, I understand that this is you really getting into the idea of blending photos, and I like the idea that you're progressing with that. So hope that gives you some thoughts and ideas for what you move on to next. So thank you for sending that one in. Okay, have we got any, Meg saying thank you to everybody who's said that they like her picture. Pat says about Vandana's picture, the leaf redeems it. Viji says, Vandana, you're brave enough to blend. I love the autumn leaf. And Rosemary says, gold text to draw out the colour of the leaf would be pretty, both in the contrast and visibility and consistent colours. That's true. I think the purple writing did kind of feel like it sort of sat quite separately from the rest of the picture as well. Okay, so what we'll move on to next then is Garry. And where are we? So Garry, boom, boom, boom. Okay, yes, here's Garry's picture. So Garry says, here we go. Christmas display at a local venue. I was attracted to this shot because the dim overcast sky outside meant the internal lights appeared more pronounced, and their gentle glow was particularly attractive. I thought there was a good separation between the figure and the background lights and trees, and with a wide aperture and resulting bokeh might be quite nice. I like the overall tonal range of the image, which I felt was warm. So, for Garry then, so yeah, absolutely, this kind of indoor display, Christmas display, and it is very Christmas seasonal. We've got, you can see it all in the background. We've got all the bits of Christmas tree. We've got all the lights. It's all very festive. Bits of trees and branches and everything else. So I think in terms of getting a seasonal celebration photo, you're bang on the money. That's good. Suggestions for something like this, I would say, however, is that it feels like, in terms of balance, I think you could have done with sitting a bit lower to take the photograph. The face of the figure, which is our brains are hardwired to look at faces first. It's the first thing we get drawn to. So even a carved face rather than a real human face, we will still tend to look there first. And it's sort of sitting in the bottom part of the photo. It's not even in the centre. It's not at the top. The part that could, the place to draw our eye is in fact actually where we've got this kind of white feather headdress. Except for the fact that, so the face is at the bottom, and then when we come down here, we've lost a bit. Oh, what's happened there? There we go. We've lost a bit of the hand as well, and I can see kind of what's happening. It looks like really you've probably taken this photo from head height, from standing up height, which is extraordinarily common, and it's the thing that we automatically do. We're standing here, we're looking at it, and so we take photos from the angle that we happen to be standing and seeing things. But it can become much more interesting if you think about trying to change the angle. And I think with something like this, if you lowered yourself by about a foot, maybe 2 foot, and actually so that your camera was more kind of chest height with the figure, right? Now at that point you would be angling up slightly. You would be able to then get his face in the higher part of the photo and still get some of that headdress above him. Importantly, you could then get his hand in, which would be holding the scepter, and you would still be able to get all the trees and lights and everything else in the background. And I think overall it would make a sort of much tighter blend, or kind of more better kind of composition, really. At the moment we are looking down on the figurine, and so that sort of diminishes it somewhat. And I think if you're trying to say, hey, look at this, elaborate carved painted figurine, then you want to make the most of it. And I think if you consider the idea of, think of this like portraiture, if you were photographing someone, it's not overly complimentary to be looking down on them when you're photographing them. You photograph them either level face, or if you're trying to get more of the body in, you go below the headline. If you're doing a full body, generally speaking, you shoot from between the waist and chest height in order to get proper proportions. Another problem, I saw this just the other day on Facebook, somebody putting in photos of somebody in action, a set of action shots of somebody full body pose, and they were really interesting action shots, and they were really well edited. The problem was they had all been taken from eye level head height standing up, so the body just kind of shrinks away, so the legs seem much smaller. So trick for if you're ever doing full body portraits, always shoot from about chest height, and it actually keeps the proportions much better. Coming back to this, I think chest height would have been, and then, obviously you would have then sort of been a bit too close. You then maybe take a step back a couple of feet. So almost sort of drop about a foot to 18 inches, maybe 2 feet in height, move back 2 or 3 feet. And then I think you would be able to get the figure, as such you would get more of the figure, you would be able to have the head slightly higher up into the picture, which would make more sense. You would still get some of the hat on, and you would still get some of the background. So, but for all that, I love the colour of this. It is warm, it is sparkly, it is festive. But I hope that gives you a few thoughts and insights there, Garry. So thank you very much for sending that one in. Right, a few comments here. Maggie says, such Christmassy colours. Viji says, wow. April says, love the Nutcracker. Pat says, what a splendid chap. Who is he? Stacey says, I like the colours of Christmas and the figure. Viji, what does Nutcracker mean? Meg says, what about taking the photo looking down? Pat says, I can't see a Nutcracker. Viji says, is he a king? Pat says, King Wenceslas. Rosemary says, originally Nutcracker had hinged jaws that crunched down on nuts in a shell to break them open. They are featured in a ballet called The Nutcracker Suite. Garry says, great feedback, thank you. And Maggie says, Viji, the Nutcracker is a character from the ballet The Nutcracker, but I'm not sure that this does represent this. Right. So I think notion of Nutcracker, April, you've managed to confuse everybody with that one. Okay. Oh, and April says, a lot of people collect them today for Christmas, Viji. They have so many themes. Right. Okay. Right, okay, so hopefully then that's been useful. So let's move on then. So now we're on to Roy. And Roy, where's Roy's gone? Oh, here we go. Roy. So Roy says, my entry in the seasonal celebrations challenge. This was taken in St George's Square in the centre of Huddersfield. I went down to photograph the large tree in the centre of the square, but was very disappointed to find that this year it was surrounded by pop-up shops and bars and hemmed in with metal barriers. However, I was pleased to find this delightful area in one corner of the square. So there you go. I mean, that's yeah. You can go down. You can have every intention. You're going to the trees in the centre. You're going to go. That's what you're off to photograph. You get there and you find you can barely see the tree because it's surrounded by a whole load of stuff you didn't want to photograph. What to do? And in this case, what Roy has done is turn and actually looked around the street and actually found some really interesting, beautiful trees all lit up. What's rather nice here now as well is it looks like he's essentially got this in the blue hour. Now, a lot of people have heard of the golden hour, less people have heard of the blue hour. So the golden hour is that hour just before sunset or the hour just after sunrise when the sun is really low in the sky. Everything tends to have a kind of golden hue to it. The blue hour, by comparison, is the hour just after sunset or the hour just before sunrise. At this point, the sky is getting darker or getting lighter if it's early in the morning, but in this case, is getting darker. And then if you're in an urban environment, if you're in a town, city, the blue hour is one of the best times to be taking photos for particular kinds of images, where what you end up is, in this case, the light. So if you think about the fact that if this was strong daylight in the middle of the day, you would barely see the lights. If it was completely nighttime, you'd see the lights, but you wouldn't see the sky. So the blue hour allows you to get a sense of it still being day, or day-ish. You've still got lighted sky, but it's getting dark. But and it always tends to have that sort of slightly bluish tint. The yellowish lights then means you end up with that sort of yellow gold against kind of a blue, and it's kind of quite nice complementary colours. So yeah, well done on spotting that. Getting those lights against the kind of blue sky really helps them stand out. Now, one of the things I would suggest here, Roy, is I can't help but this is one of the way you've cropped it is one of those kind of in-between crops where it's not quite landscape and it's not quite square. And to me it's almost like not having a level horizon. It just kind of makes me want to go, yeah, crop it in a little bit more or stretch it out. So if we take this, I just want to kind of show you roughly what I'm looking at. Let's just close that and we'll close Roberts as well and push that in. Now, if you were to make this square, now at this point we need to go to something like that. Now, I can see the problem is that essentially we miss out too much of what you were trying to go for. The other thing so there's part of me we really want to know. I kind of feel like you see what you've got here is you've got tree. All the trees are sort of disappearing down in a line, and you're going for. So the structure of this photo is landscape. It's asking us to draw ourselves along. So as we look at it, and so I think what you really needed to have done. Is kind of. We just wanted to really ignore that green. I'm going to change that background in a minute, but it doesn't really matter. But I'll just do content aware, something like that, and then now obviously it's not going to be absolutely perfect, but this gives you an idea, I think, of the fact that I don't know what the rest of it, whether there were more trees down to the left or more trees up to the right or something like that. But I think generally speaking, as a composition. That kind of landscape feel would give you a kind of a much better feel to it. You don't feel like whereas, because in your original, it just feels kind of a bit cropped in too close, a bit too squashed. We start to move and then we come to the end of the picture just a bit too quickly. So something to keep in mind, that if you are doing several items in a row, quite often, and that row is horizontal, then very often you want to make sure that you kind of create more of a landscape style crop with it. But well spotted for getting the blue hour and those the tree lights against it. Right. Okay, so Maggie says sparkly lights, so uplifting. Viji says sparkling and Christmassy. Pat says love the delicate colouring of the lit trees. Meg says beautiful colours. Rosemary says lovely sparkle, contrast and depth. Not sure about the light blue halo around the trees. How do we avoid that? And April says I like the landscape feel. Okay, so let's just take a quick look back. What do you mean by the light blue halo around the trees? Now, I can't. Is there a slight? I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't. I'm not noticing it too much. Maybe a very, very fraction of one. Okay, this might be if you, depending on how you've edited it, it might have darkened, but not darkened it down all the way. So there's so there's a sort of slight lighter patch just next to the trees. And to get around that, it's really about just making sure you're doing your editing properly. It's very easy to kind of, it's a little bit like that forehead bit on Robert's picture where he's darkened the head, but where it goes up against the hat doesn't properly fit quite right. And here's one of those things that when you're editing, it's the edges, it's where the bit you're darkening joins onto the bit you're not. That is always the trickiest, most difficult bit. So it is something to kind of just take into consideration. Right, okay. So, next up, not a picture, but a question. So this was from Garry, who was asking actually about desktop studio question. If you were going to create a small desktop studio, which could be quickly set up and dismantled, something to photograph small items and subjects, what would you use? How would you set it up? Okay, so this is a slightly complex one to try and answer for you, Garry, because there are multiple answers and as many different solutions as there are people who've ever attempted it. However, a little bit depends on what you're wanting to photograph. So if you are wanting to photograph small items, jewellery items, you're wanting to do that, or supposing you're putting things on eBay, you're wanting a clean white background or a clean black background, and you wanted to photograph something like a mug, or jewellery or something like that, a very common option is a light tent. And a light tent is like a kind of collapsible white box, a little bit like one of those pop-up tents. It's made with that same kind of semi-translucent material, generally tends to be white, and or like the umbrellas which you shoot through with your lights. And excuse me. Now, what you then do, because you've got this kind of cube, and then you're shooting at one side of it, you then stick the lights outside the box. The lights come in, they hit and then the material acts as a diffusing material, so you don't end up with any hard shadows, and it sort of softens the light, and everything kind of becomes an all-round gentle light. So a lot of product photography is done within these little tents. And they tend to be, if you know what you're doing, easy to pop up, easy to put down again. But generally speaking, if you're wanting to kind of create a sort of small studio space for photographing small items, and you're not talking about a light tent, then it's kind of so much depends on where you live, what you've got to hand. It's well worth, if it's something you're going to be doing a lot of, trying to find a corner in your house. It might be in a particular room or something, but you want to try and find something where you can set up a quick table. Now that might be an actual like pop-up table, it might be your dining room table, it might be you've got a box and then you stick a piece of board across the top of it. But what you're thinking about is you need to have a surface and you need to have a back part to it. The back part might be an ordinary wall, or it might be another piece of board which you can hang some kind of backing over it. Okay, so I don't know whether you remember, whether you were around about a year ago or back at the beginning of the year. I think I was doing still life, a thing on still life, and I sort of photographed photography, and I just created a very quick setup where I got a box, I put like a table board on it, a bit of hardboard behind it, threw a cloth over it, and then that was essentially my set. It really comes down to, so if you know you've got the pieces, if you've got like a base, if you've got a back, if you've got a table, a collapsible, something or other, and then have a place to store these things. You have a box, you have a space in the cupboard under the stairs or in your shed or wherever else it is. And by and large, there's not a single answer here, but it's about just thinking, how can I create something which is going to be as simple as possible to put together and as simple as possible to dismantle and as simple as possible to store? And basically, what kind of thing you're going to need? Are you wanting to sort of, do you need that light tent kind of idea? In which case, just look them up on the internet. There's hundreds of different kinds you can get. Or if there's a camera shop near you, go in and talk to the people there. They can show you the different options. Or like I say, otherwise you need some kind of board for a base, something to support it on, and some kind of board for a background. And then you play around with cloths or backgrounds or whatever else you want to do. So really kind of play a bit. Not sure how much that helps, but I hope it gives you, maybe sparks a couple of ideas for you, Garry. Okay, Roy, where are we? Viji said, landscape is good. Was the image cropped, Roy? Roy says, slightly Viji, I cropped out a pop-up bar on the right-hand side. Ruth. No, Ruth Robinson has come in and has also written Vas F Tech. So I presume that is yet another spam message. So I'll just click remove on that. VG says, yes, content aware is easier. Most of the time there will be an obstacle. I crop too, lovely capture. Okay, and Garry says, thank you. Cool. Okay, so on to next picture. And we're talking, it's Viji. So, Viji has put in this photo. Viji's been getting very creative. And Viji said, should I title this Zen Christmas? Christmas is a festival I watch in movies. Because we have to remember, Viji is in India, where Christianity isn't the dominant religion. And says, Christmas is Christmas festival I watch in movies. But at our office, we celebrate all festivals. As our employees follow many religions, we have a chance to experience all traditions. Wow, how fun is that? The thought of decorating my desk for Christmas and also wanted to combine it with our photo challenge. So I created the tree from an old magazine and made the star with a brown paper bag. So brilliant sets of ideas of recycling, created the tree out of the magazine, the bag, the star, beautifully created out of an old brown bag. So fantastic. I tried recycling the waste as much as I could. Good stuff. Good for the planet too. The terracotta mug was made by me too. A few years back, which I used to keep my pens. I've got a mug as well, which was created on something I went to, and you got to paint something and make something, and it was so appallingly bad for any use. It just ends up purely holding pens as well. Here's mine. Yeah, so sometimes you end up with something and actually there's very other little, you don't want to get rid of it, but it's not really usable as a mug. So pen storage is absolutely perfect for it. So yeah, really, but it's nice and festive. You've got lots of lights in there as well. So VG goes on. Thought of adding the Buddha to my decor because he's always on my desk. Well, why not indeed? What is Christmas without fairy lights? Wind some on the tree and inside the mug quite liberally. Now, the on my laptop wallpaper, you can see the photo of the bauble, which I put in for last year's challenge. I remember that bauble, VG. So I thought of putting everything together to bring about the festive mood. Merry Christmas, everyone. P.S. The tiny green Christmas tree you see in the May, you can see I made with green paper. So that's over here on the left. So this is VG being incredibly creative. So I think that's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, VG. Really creative. It's a bit like your model making, real hands-on, create something specifically for your desk. So beautifully creative, and I like this photo. I do have to say I like this photo because we've got the laptop there, and you've got your Buddha, and you've got the little tree. It is a desktop set of decorations. This is where you work. You sort of put everything out, and it's just sort of sitting there, and it's giving you that little bit of spirit of Christmas, while at the same time having your other influences, which are really important to you. So, lovely photo there, VG. Thank you very much for sending that one in. So we've got a couple of comments here. Maggie says, love your paper tree, Viji. Now I'm wondering how big it could be made. I suppose it depends on how big the magazine is you start with. April says, I love that tree. Meg says, very creative, Viji. Rosemary says, Viji, you're so clever in the way you make things out of paper. Pat says, brilliant and beautiful, Viji. And Robert says, smug points for Viji. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Have some smug points. So I kind of forgot about smug points. Yes. Well, given the fact that we only had half a dozen of you actually put some photos in, smug points to everybody who sent in photos. So that pretty much brings us towards the end of this this podcast. Now next week I'm going to be talking about a photo shoot I did for the Dumfries Slow Fashion Movement back at the end of October. Slow fashion is one of these sort of drives and movements at the moment, which is sort of opposing the idea of fast fashion. Fast fashion being there's a big drive, it's terrible in terms of wastage and all the rest of it, where people buy clothing which they use once, throw it away, disposable. And so the idea of slow fashion is actually where you recycle, repurpose, where maybe you're just literally wearing something from a long time ago, second hand, or whether you're cutting bits out and stitching bits and creating new things together. So anyway, the fashion show was put on for this, and I'll talk much more about this next week. But the other thing is that the photos have now appeared. The photos that I took have appeared in Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine. Now it came out on Friday. I subscribe. It's not turned up yet. But one of my favourite photos that I took was this one. It was the fashion show happened at the Theatre Royal in Dumfries, and I took this photo in the wings of the so the theatre is set, the stage is behind her. But I love this idea of kind of creating a backdrop where we've got, you can see the ladders. We've got these fantastic heads which were also being used in the show as well. There's people moving around in the background. And I set up the lighting to try and create something like that. So I'm going to be talking about that photo and some other photos that I took where we created a whole set in the dressing room as well. So hopefully you can tune in next Sunday. That'll be the 19th of December for that. Quick heads up of the following week after that, the 26th of December is Boxing Day, which is for us very much a family time together. I won't be doing... So there won't be a podcast on Sunday the 26th, but the following week, which I think is the 2nd of January, we will be again. But next week I'll remind you about all that, and I'll tell you what we'll be chatting about for the first one of the new year as well. So that's kind of where we're at. If you've enjoyed these podcasts, if you find them useful, entertaining, educational, would like to support them in any way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do that. Another way, invite your friends as well. Spread the word. So that pretty much brings us to an end. Look forward to seeing everybody next week. Last few comments here. What have we got? Okay, Viji saying thank you to everyone who was giving nice comments there. Robert says get well soon, Kim. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. Rosemary says, I love that idea of slow fashion. Should be really interesting photo shoot. Yeah, it really was. I'll tell you more about it next week. Viji says thanks for recommending. It's more smug. Oh yes, because Maggie said a decoration of smug points. Viji. Stacey says, "Wow, I love repurposed items. Interesting." Maggie's saying, "I think to Viji, I will look forward to seeing what you create next." April says, "Never heard of that. Interesting. Feel better, Kim. Everyone have a great week." Pat saying, "Happy Christmas." Stacey saying, "Enjoy your evening. Get plenty of rest and chicken soup." Actually, I think we've got a chicken stew tonight for dinner. Ksenia Brown says thank you. I'm glad you could make it along, Ksenia. And Jackie says thanks here, Kim. Viji says wow, wanting to know more. Right. Okay, so thank you very much to everyone. greatly appreciate everybody who's turned up. We have actually, I thought we might have all been over in about 40 minutes, but we have actually taken pretty much the hour, so just as well, maybe not too many more people did actually send in images. So look forward to seeing you all next Sunday, and in the meantime, have a wonderful week. Take care. Bye-bye.